You can do this. You can do this. Come on. Here we go. No. That's fine. Let's just do that. That's how a lot of people pan their mixes. They're way too timid. It's like they're scared to make those panners go out nice and wide. And it's a big mistake. If you're new to mixing, I want to teach you a concept that will make your panning decisions way easier and will likely be a game changer for the way your mixes sound. It's called LCR panning. LCR takes all the guesswork out of panning. You have 3 choices when it comes to panning a track: hard left, right up the middle, hard right. Left, center, right. Before we dive into what that's all about and why it works, let's just hear what it sounds like. I'm going to play for you a couple of different mixes with timid panning and with LCR panning, and listen to the difference. So what were your impressions between the two? To my ear, the LCR mixes sounded way wider, of course, but also they sounded fuller, bigger, like they had more energy. Whereas the non-LCR mixes, which are the ones with the timid panning, sounded more dull, obviously thinner, but they honestly didn't sound as professional as the other ones. And the only thing that changed was the panning. There weren't any new plugins. There wasn't any other voodoo going on. It was just the fact that we took the mix from here to here, and it made all the difference. So to review, LCR panning is left, center, right panning, meaning hard left, right up the middle, hard right. LCR. I like to think of it as buckets. I've got 3 buckets into which I can put every track in my session. It either goes in the left bucket, the center bucket, or the right bucket. Now you may say, of course, Joe, what about stereo tracks? Well, typically those just go in the left and right buckets, right? All the way left, all the way right. So did I invent LCR panning? No, of course not. It's not my invention, but it is something that you will hear all over the place. In fact, if you want to pause this video, go pull up your favorite album, your favorite record, and listen. You will hear LCR panning in effect. You may not realize it, but if you pay attention to it, you'll realize that things like guitars are panned all the way to the left, all the way to the right. You'll hear tambourines all the way to the left, all the way to the right. Vocals, background vocals, pianos, all sorts of things will be all the way to the left and all the way to the right. Let's test that theory. Here is the song One Headlight by the Wallflowers, one of my favorite songs. I use it as a reference all the time. If I'm in a new room, got a new set of speakers, new set of headphones, I listen to this to kind of get my reference point because it's a fantastic sounding mix. So let's see. Does One Headlight by the Wallflowers from 1996 have LCR panning? Yes, it does. It only took like half a second to realize that first guitar comes in, it is panned all the way to the left, hard left. Now, it's also being sent to a reverb that's either up the middle or to the right, but the actual guitar itself is hard left. What happens when the other guitars come in?
Lost my only friend. Well, they said she died easy of a broken heart disease. As I listened.
Yep, that other guitar on the right, that's all the way to the right. Then when that first slide guitar comes back in later, it's all the way to the left. It is LCR. So I didn't invent this, but if you're new to mixing, you probably feel weird about moving that thing all the way to the left or all the way to the right, especially if you're doing it on headphones because that can feel extreme. But that's the way forward. Now, don't just take my word for it. Go listen to the last thing you listened to in your music library, and I bet you're going to hear stuff panned hard left, stuff panned hard right, stuff panned right up the middle. But why? Why do they do this? I think the answer is a lot more simple than we think. It's because if I think of my mix in terms of left to right, stereo space. What do you think I should be doing with that space? In my mind, and apparently in the minds of all these professionals, I should fill it up. So if I've got 3 tracks, I'd like to put 1 hard left, 1 hard right, 1 up the middle. That just makes sense. To put it like this versus like this means I'm only taking advantage of a tiny percentage of the full stereo spectrum. Why wouldn't I make it nice and loud? We already heard that the wider mixes tend to sound better. There's nothing weird about them. It's only weird when you go behind the curtain and you're doing your own mix and you move something far left or far right and it feels weird to you. It only feels weird to you because you haven't done it enough. When you're in that moment of like, oh, I'm scared, just go listen to a professional mix and you'll hear, oh, well, they panned everything hard left and right. Oh, I'll be fine. And just go back in and pan it all the way to the left. What this does for you is a couple of things. First of all, it's going to make your mixes sound better. Second of all, it's going to make the panning decisions a lot easier. So instead of trying to decide between going 30% to the right versus 40% to the right, you're taking that whole decision process out of it entirely. So now the answer is only one of 3 buckets: left, center, and right. So now when you have something, you will just say, okay, where does it go? And if it goes in the left, probably I need to put something else in the right to balance those things out. This, by the way, is a huge hack for your recording sessions as well. When I'm recording something, like I'm in the process of producing the song, we're not anywhere close to mixing, I'm still thinking about panning. When I record this guitar part, I'm thinking, where's this gonna go? Left, center, or right. I use the same buckets. I recycle the same buckets for my recordings that I use in my mixes. Because if I record a guitar and it sounds cool and I decide it's going to go in the left, what happens next? The very next question that I have is, okay, if that's left, what's going to go right to balance those out, right? Otherwise, it's going to be a really left-heavy thing. Or in the example of that Wallflower song, it was left-heavy for a second, then eventually the right guitar comes in to give us that sense of balance. That's what I'm thinking about in recording, and it's also what I'm thinking about in mixing. And guess what? When I go to mix those songs that I've produced, the panning decisions are basically already made for me because I produced it with the LCR panning in mind. So, are there situations where LCR panning doesn't make sense? Yes. My rule of thumb is to use LCR panning until it doesn't make sense, meaning I slap things hard left, hard right, and up the middle, and only if that really does legitimately sound off will I pull things in. I would argue it's probably less than 5% of the time that I'm doing something other than LCR panning. Now, a few examples of where I will do that. If I've got a really wide keyboard sound, like for example, a lot of Fender Rhodes patches, that cool, warm piano sound, a lot of times they'll have this back and forth sort of stereo tremolo thing going. So you play boom, and it's going but it's actually going back and forth left to right. That can feel weird in a mix depending on the song. So if that feels like the whole mix is like bouncing back and forth and it's distracting me, then I might take that track and make it more narrow. Another example would be if I've got a duet, which you don't hear a lot of duets, but if there's a male vocal and a female vocal and they're singing back and forth, sometimes having them right on top of each other is fine, but occasionally moving one just a little bit to the left and one a little bit to the right can create just enough separation to make that sound nice without the mix feeling super lopsided when only one of them is singing. And the final place where I might do this is if I'm really trying to create or recreate sort of a soundstage environment. So let's say it's a bluegrass album, a bluegrass project, and there's maybe 4 musicians. So if they were playing in front of me, they'd be standing here, 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 and here. I might pan them accordingly so it feels like they're in that sound stage. I can probably count on one finger the number of times I've done that in a real life session. A lot of people get obsessed with, I want to make it sound as if it's a performance. So if when I go to a show, I'm standing here and the stage is kind of like this. So the farthest thing to the left is this guitar player and the bass player is this far to the right. It doesn't make sense for me to make things really wide in my studio mix because it's not that wide in a live show. That reasoning, that logic falls apart super quickly. First of all, most concerts you go to aren't in stereo at all. The front of house people typically are panning everything right up the middle. It's just a big old mono fest. So your argument doesn't hold weight there. Secondly, If you're going to take that approach, then if drums aren't in the center of the stage, you've got to pan them to where they are. If the bass player is off to the right, you got to pan your bass to the right. That doesn't make any sense. Bass and kick drum go up the middle. That's just the way it is. So that whole like trying to recreate the live performance, it's really not a thing, and it's certainly not a thing that your listener is hoping to hear. They just want it to sound good. They just want it to sound like the other stuff they're listening to in their music library, and the other stuff in their music library employs LCR panning. Finally, where does panning fall into the mixing process? For me, it happens in step 2. Step 2 is when I do the static mix. I'm setting levels and I'm setting panning positions. The plugins come later, but those decisions are really important early on. If you don't have that panning step in your process, or worse yet, you don't have a process for mixing, a process that you can repeat over and over and over again to get consistent and great results, I implore you, check out my free 5-step mix guide. It's just 5 steps. You can apply that to any mix and get great results. Just go to 5stepmix.com to get your free copy. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. I appreciate you. I'll see you in the next one.